Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to another special guest episode. I am thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Amy Fogelman, who has taken a really interesting journey. And we're going to talk about sort of the intersection between law and medicine and just hear a really interesting different perspective. So, Amy, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are in the world, what your background is.
So I grew up in the Boston area. I went to college in Connecticut where I met my husband. Then I went to medical school in Boston at BU. I went into residency in internal medicine. I had my first daughter actually during residency, which was an interesting experience. And I was planning on actually specializing when I was in residency, but because I had my daughter, I ended up taking 6 months off because I had told them, I'm pregnant, and asked them to put me in ambulatory during the month that I was expecting, but instead they put me in the ICU. And
Oh, great.
I don't know if they were doing it on purpose, but it felt very aggressive to me. And I was like, you know what? And I just took a 6 month leave during my residency after my daughter was born, and it was like the best 6 months of my entire life. And so then when I came back to residency and had 2 years left, or I guess a year and a half, whatever it was. I'm at this point, I can't even remember. But I ended up just saying, you know what, I just want to start practicing. I don't want to do any more training. I'm done.
This is good.
So this is good. So I did primary care. I got a great job at an academic medical center at Mass General Hospital in Boston. It was a wonderful job. There were, I think, 8 physicians working there, really smart people, really nice people. There were 3 women that were so supportive of one another, not competitive at all. I'd never experienced anything like that before. It was just great. But the commute was terrible. And I was getting up at like 5 o'clock in the morning so that because I'm all about efficiency, I didn't want to be, it was like it's a 30-minute drive without traffic. So I was trying to avoid traffic, and I was doing these crazy hours to avoid traffic, which meant that I wasn't home with my family, and I was completely sleep deprived. And I think that really was where the burnout started for me, because I was enjoying my job. I was really enjoying all of the other projects I was doing on the side, and I wasn't getting paid for any of them, which is typical in academic
And
practices.
non-academic.
Yeah, that's probably true. But I loved working with the residents. I loved working on opioid policies that I was doing a lot of, and I just enjoyed it a lot. But it became a grind. I had my second daughter, and I just finally said, you know what, I can't do this commute anymore. And I moved to another job that I thought I'm going to be super smart, and I'm just going to do all clinical. And I ended up coming to this job, and it's about 10 minutes away from my house. And unfortunately, what I realized was that it was all that other stuff that made me really enjoy my job. It wasn't the clinical stuff that was keeping me satisfied. Also, there's something to be said for the trust that you build with your patient panel over 10, 12 years, where they believe in you, where they trust what you're saying, versus you're a brand new doctor. People are just meeting you for the first time. And the patient panel was very different. It was a very suburban, very like, I want my Z-Pack, give it to me now, practice. And then a couple of other things happened, which contributed to me just like totally burning out. So I stayed there for a couple of years, but I eventually ended up deciding that I needed to leave.
Yeah. Well, and I want to highlight there that we can sort of fall into this trap of kind of the cult of efficiency, right? Of thinking, oh, it's really important for me to make my commute as short as possible, which means I have to get up super early and not be there in the morning because, efficiency is key, right? Rather than thinking about, no, like what actually makes my life more enjoyable or kind of the balance of those things. I think that's part of the way that we're trained to think about things and these environments that we work in.
That's so true. And I
Yeah.
think if I had it to do over again, I wish that I had engaged a coach before I left that job at Mass General.
What do you think that would have brought you?
I
Out of
would have
curiosity.
understood what I liked about it. And I would have been able to create a position there maybe that maximized the things that I liked and minimized the things that weren't working for me to create a new position that would have been great, as opposed to just thinking,
Jumping.
oh, it's the commute, focusing on that, not really doing a differential diagnosis, just sort
Right.
of just looking at it in one thing and then ending up in a job that was absolutely terrible
Yeah.
for me as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's a really important point as well, right? Because so often when we're miserable, we're very quick to pick the thing, right? This thing is the thing that is bothering me, and I'm gonna leave so I don't have that thing anymore without really considering how do I make this better for myself? What other things could I do? How could I do this differently? What could I ask for? Yeah, and who can help me,
Totally.
right? And I'm assuming, that but correct me if I'm wrong, like I wasn't aware of physician coaching as a thing at all, really, until a pretty recent time ago.
Yeah,
So
I
I
mean,
think
I
that's
didn't
new,
even know
but
about physician coaching. I just mean like a career coach.
just a
I
career
so
coach. Yeah.
arbitrarily jumped
Yeah.
into so many positions in life just because, my dad was a doctor, so I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I chose internal medicine as a profession because the intern when I was a third year resident was like super cool and I wanted to emulate her. These were not reasons to choose career based decisions, and I never really and my choice to go into primary care was just, I had a baby and I was like, okay, I'm
Right.
done. None of these things were particularly well thought out decisions, and and even in residency, I was shocked as an intern that there were all of these preliminary residents in fields that I'd never even heard of before. Like, that's how could I chose to go into something, but I didn't know these other fields existed. Now,
Right.
I don't think I would have wanted to be a, PM&R physician, but like, I
But
had
who
no
knows?
idea that it existed. Now, what kind of medical school is not giving their students that information so that they can make an informed decision when they're ranking their choices? It just is kind of crazy to me. So I think that there's a lot of things that we do where we're just not very well informed. Now, maybe with social media, things are better now, that
Maybe.
people have access. I mean, we didn't even have the internet there then. So,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
old.
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about so you had gone to this other job, right? And the commute was short, right? So we took care of that problem, but
Yes.
it was an environment that sounded like it didn't particularly enjoy and very different sort of challenges and all clinical.
Yeah,
And
the problem was really, and was that we were all just working. There was
yeah,
no like
head down,
camaraderie.
see all the patients,
Correct.
work as hard as you can, and probably try and, keep up and be tough enough, right? That's kind of how some of those jobs go. What happened, as you were realizing, like, this is not the right place for me?
Well, okay. There's a couple of weird things that happened to me that are just unfortunate that they did happen, and they definitely colored my experience at this other job. Um, First of all, sounds kooky, but I think that the practice was haunted because because everybody got sick at that practice. It was really weird. Like every single person had like a death, had a major catastrophic injury, or and it was just it happened to there's weren't that many people working there, but it happened to every single people there. So the first month that I worked there, I fell down my stairs at my house and banged my head and had a major concussion. Thankfully, that was all that happened. I didn't break any bones, but it was absolutely terrifying. And I thought, oh, it's no big deal. I got staples in my head. I'll be fine. I went to work the next day. What happened was it was right around right around Halloween, I mean. I was coming downstairs because my mom had bought some Halloween candy. And I was just getting a little like midnight snack. I was wearing socks, and I slipped on the wooden stairs and hit my head. I ended up, concussions are very real.
Yeah.
I ended up in a situation where I was seeing patients because I didn't want people at my practice, at this brand new practice, to think, like, I immediately was like, they're going to think I'm an alcoholic. That's what I thought, because that's what I would think if that had happened. And I was like, I need to come into work. I can't, tell them that I fell down the stairs, and I can't. So I came into work, but I realized that I forgot my commute. I forgot everything. My short-term, I was having terrible short-term memory loss. So then I took off a couple, like a week or two, but then went back to seeing patients. But I was very, very impaired. So I was relying on my notes, but I wasn't remembering the patients between my visits. So of course, these are brand new patients that I don't know, and I'm trying to create relationships with them. That's not an ideal situation.
Not ideal.
And it's also like I had this major issue where, for me, it was noise sensitivity that was an issue. But it actually continued to affect me for about a year.
Yeah.
And I still don't remember, like, things from that year. My daughter will mention her teacher from second grade, and I'll be like, who are you talking about? I don't, and I've met with her. That whole year is missing. So that happened to me right when I started that job. And then my dad died. And so it was just an accumulation of things. But then there were just things in my job that I did not have control over, that I was getting. This was the thing that was driving me crazy, and I'm sure that your listeners can appreciate this, that the only feedback I was getting was negative feedback.
Yeah.
And it was about things that I had no control over. So I was getting feedback from the people that own the practice, and it was, you didn't bill this right, you didn't do. It was a you didn't do a welcome to Medicare physical. You did their second annual wellness visit.
The second annual wellness visit,
and
which
the
doesn't
thing is,
make as much money.
Right. But also, if you don't do it right, you can't bill it.
Right.
And I know for a fact that I questioned, because it was scheduled that way. I didn't schedule it that way.
Right.
So I questioned my front desk staff, because I said, I think that this person is brand new to Medicare. Can you double check that that's the right visit? And he double checked, and he said, nope, that's the right visit. So I went back to the billing person. I said, look, I asked my front desk staff, so in the future, if I have a question about this, can I ask you? No, you can't. Well, then why are you yelling at me about this?
Right. This is not what our license is used for. Remembering all these nuanced details of like this, yeah.
But
I mean, I
I
can hear
am
everybody out in the
very,
audience
very
being like,
good.
"Ugh."
I'm so good at those details. Like compared to
Yeah,
other doctors, that's something like my brain works really well that way. So that's why I even questioned it. I would say
yeah,
9 out of 10 doctors wouldn't have even asked the front desk staff, is
yeah,
that the right visit? Because they would
yeah.
have said, that's not my job. It is not
Right.
my job to question how the visit was scheduled. But I did, and
Yeah,
I was told the wrong thing, and then I ended up getting blasted for it.
yeah.
And that's the only like feedback I'm
Kind of
getting.
feedback. Yep, yep.
I'm not getting anything. And these non-doctors who own the practice are calling me Amy.
Hmm.
And like, this is another thing that's kind of driving me crazy.
Yeah,
Like, I'm just a cog in the wheel.
yeah.
And then I'm realizing, because I'm hearing from the patients, that I'm like the sixth doctor that has taken over their
Over since
panel
they've
in the
been
in
there.
the past
Hmm.
6 years. And that there's something going on here. And then I get this message from somebody who's angry about, in the patient site, whatever it is, my charter,
Yeah,
saying that I billed him, that he got a bill from his deductible from his insurance, for a diagnosis code, for labs, but he came in for a physical, and that, how dare I bill a diagnosis code?
yeah,
And now I know that I saw him. He was complaining of a condition.
yeah,
I did a differential diagnosis in my mind,
yeah,
and I ordered tests
yeah,
because, and made a diagnosis
yeah. You
actually
did appropriate
based,
medical care during a wellness visit, and that's my free visit, quote unquote.
correct. And
Oh,
his level, and he's a CEO of a company,
yeah,
and his
yeah,
level of contempt towards me for the amount, and it was like a $500 bill, which, listen, I totally understand. If you're
yeah,
not expecting that, that's very frustrating, and you're
yeah,
like, why am I getting billed this? As somebody who's not burnt out,
yeah,
I can see that. But when you're in the system and I'm only able to see it from my
right.
perspective,
Yeah,
I feel like I'm getting attacked for something that I have no control over.
yeah,
And
and
I
yeah,
and I
not
just responded,
appropriate,
and
and
and I like, and it was like the last straw, that, like, I felt like he was going to come after me, because he said, you say that you don't have any control over this, but you're the doctor, and it's just like very kind of like personal pointed
yeah,
things, and I was like afraid that he was going to come after me for this bill. So I got really afraid and just like perseverated on this.
yeah,
In retrospect, I was incredibly anxious. And it was actually my husband who said, Amy, you don't have to do this anymore.
yeah,
And I was like, but what would I do? I could not imagine, A, that I could do anything else but see patients. I didn't think I had any other skills. And B, I felt like, because my family got our health insurance through my job, that it was absolutely, that I was stuck. And that, like, there was no way for us to, that there was no escape from this.
yeah,
Honestly, I think if my husband had not said that to me, I think it could have gotten worse. And I know that there's an issue with physician suicide, and I wasn't suicidal,
yeah.
but I can
But
see how
people
that
can go there,
I can
right?
see how that could
Yeah,
happen.
yeah. Well, and I think, again, sort of thinking through things, right? So there was the situation at the clinic, right? There were, these episodes that would happen that are total nightmares, just of like feedback about stuff that is not, I, it's like, are we really going to argue about this? Yeah, the patients who complain about a copay with their physical, I spent an hour with you.
Right.
And this is not a quote unquote free visit, but all the messaging is just funky, and it's not our fault, but we end up being, the one taking the blame. but also you had real life stuff, right? A concussion that really affected you, a significant death. Again, so often we're treated like these things shouldn't happen to us, right? We should not get injured. And if we are injured and we've got long-term, complications, that's creating inconvenience for everyone, right? And I can only imagine with the newness, right, of this place. It's like, oh God, I can't take time off, even though it's really hard to work with a concussion and you're not supposed to, right? But then also when someone dies or someone is sick in the family, we have real life stuff too, and we're human. And again, that's treated as, well, that's inconvenient, and we can't accommodate that often.
Right.
So it's like, no wonder, like, these things are very real elements of many people's stories. And there is no just one solution, but we can see how the systems, sort of play into this, right? Because they're not set up to accommodate real life happening to us.
Right.
Right. Okay, so your husband, thankfully, said you don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Where did that go?
So I ended up at this point saying, what can I do?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, maybe I don't have to do this. And we decided I was going to take 6 months off. And so I, gave my what's it called, notice. And I interviewed a few career coaches and I found one. And she was wonderful. She's not a physician. I didn't know about as many physician coaches back then.
Yeah.
This was a while ago.
Yeah.
But she did like personality testing on me because, again, I had never really thought about exactly what, like, the question for me at that point was what I was good at, what I liked doing, what I actually wanted to do because it was something that gave me joy versus and things that maybe don't come so easily to me, but that's okay. I'll work harder at them because that's something that I want in my job versus things that just come so easily to me that I don't even have to think about them. Like I should maximize those in the job that I have. So just really kind of thinking about it. The other thing that I did during that time was I had, I think 100 cups of coffee with tons of physicians who are non-clinical all over the Boston area. It started with somebody who was my chief resident, Graham Gardner, who was wonderful. He gave me a whole primer on all the different non-clinical options there are out there. And he introduced me to a few different people who then each one introduced me to more people and just really asking, well, what do you do for your job? What's your day like? Different things than, I ever considered before, but are so critical when you're imagining what your career is. I ended up after it all, after interviewing for a bunch of jobs, getting some job offers that I ended up not taking, I realized I wanted to be a business owner. And I realized that I actually, I wanted to try being my own boss. Once I got over the lack of an insurance issue, which there are ways to pay for your health insurance.
Yeah.
And it's not
And
quite
your
as
malpractice and any,
it's not
or
quite
whatever
as
else that you need.
scary
Like,
as
yeah.
one thinks. Like this is something that people do. It's an expense, but it's not. It's not a reason to handcuff you to your job.
Yeah.
But I had realized that it was like a light bulb. So my husband is an attorney, and over the years I've been always giving him these free, legal advice over the dinner table. And also during this 6-month period, some of his colleagues knew that I was not as busy and they were asking me advice for things. And then I was like, this is a business here. And so I started this company where I give attorneys, help with their cases. But the thing that I was really enjoying the most was connecting attorneys to medical experts across the country. And making those connections is really fun. And then I also realized over the years that teaching other medical professionals how to be expert witnesses is super fun to me too. So I created this company from nowhere. That was back in 2018. This started, so pre-pandemic, and it's been really a wild ride, but very fun.
Yeah. Well, and I love that, as you were able to kind of zoom back a little bit, right? And sort of get out of the, I don't know, I guess it would be myopia of like, what could I do? And like, I only know how to do this. And like, this is the only thing. When we get out of that space and start talking and connecting and figuring out what do other people do, whole new worlds open up and ideas, right? And of course, as we're healing burnout, right, as we're feeling better, as we're feeling less anxious and hypervigilant, so much creativity opens up out of that, right? I'm going to guess that even if you met people who were doing medical expert witness work, you didn't see somebody who created what you created, right? You
Totally.
created a business
Right.
that is centered around helping other people to do this work, kind of based on the need that you saw, right? And for anybody who's listening to that, thinking about for yourself, like, what am I really good at? What am I really interested in? Is there an opportunity to think about something more creatively and create something, whether it's a business or, something that you just want to spend your time doing on the side? Again, sort of getting out of that very limited space, right? Like, I'm sure that I can just kind of see, right, one's brain kind of expanding and opening.
I love that. I
Yeah.
think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. I would not have been able to see that if I had been sort of stuck in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
burnout phase.
Yeah.
Just
And I,
like I wouldn't have been able to see the patient's perspective of that encounter. Like, let's go back to that patient that was really frustrated about that
right.
$500 thing.
Right.
I was so in my own feeling about that, right?
Yeah.
That probably I was defensive, which kind of pissed him off more, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're not burnt out and you're able to see it from somebody else's perspective, that allows you to have like a more not only creative but connection between people,
Absolutely.
and then you heal those wounds as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It is a good sort of focus on the toxicity of burnout itself, because burnout doesn't just affect you. It does affect you for sure, but it also has ripples into your relationship with your family, with your patients, with your staff, right? How many of us, have experienced being really crispy, at home or, with the people that we work alongside? I know that part of my story, when I really realized I needed help, is I was really, really incredibly curt with a patient that I knew well, and I could not be there for her, and that was very different for me, very jarring. And I was like, this is not okay. I can't keep going like this. And I know that other people share that story, right, of experiencing something so intense like that and just knowing like this is not me,
Right.
right? And of course, we'll all take different journeys to get there. Just kind of thinking, I'm going to go to this question a little earlier, but for somebody who is, sitting in that space right now and they're being bombarded with this feedback that they're just like so over. Like, what would have been helpful for you to hear at that time, looking back from your perspective now?
What would have been helpful for me to hear from who?
From anyone who you could have trusted and maybe listened to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think at that point where I was in my second job, I think I had been like slowly burning out for a long time. And
Hmm.
then because of my illness and my, my dad's death, there were a lot of things that kind of
Yeah.
made it more acute.
Yeah.
So I don't know that if I had heard something different, it would have made that much of a difference, to be
Hmm.
honest. But I think if I could go back to my old job
Hmm.
when I was thinking about leaving there, what would have been helpful to me would just be to understand that there's other things available. There's
Hmm.
other jobs available.
Right.
There's other You can negotiate for things that aren't working for you.
Yeah.
You can go to a different practice.
Yeah.
You can work one day less a week. I mean, whatever it is,
Right.
there's ways to make it work. And I wish that I had diagnosed that sooner.
Yeah. So, and it could have been staying at that job, but changing something about it.
Correct.
It could have been going someplace else, but with a different mindset of, I'm going to choose the things that I really enjoy, right? Kind of asking those questions before you jumped.
I think that if I had gone, if, I think if I had been a business, if I had owned my own practice in that second job, that would have made the difference. Now, if I had still fallen down the stairs and my father had died, that would have created its own
Yeah.
problems to not
Yeah.
have the infrastructure
Yeah.
of other people helping.
Yeah.
But I think for me, and this is what sorry, I got very excited about that. For me, what I have realized about myself is I like to be in control of
Hmm.
the things that I can control.
Yeah.
And it's that lack of getting feedback about things that I have no control over.
Hmm.
I can't hire or fire the front desk staff, but
Right.
yet you're
Or
telling
control
me
the
that
bathroom being dirty.
they made a mistake with the way that they scheduled that appointment. I asked them, they said that it was still X, and you're
Hmm.
telling me that I did something wrong. You're
Right.
not fixing
Right.
the front desk staff,
Right.
and I'm asking you, how can I fix this? And you're telling me there's nothing I can do,
Yeah.
but I
There's
should
nothing
have billed
before
it.
or after that could have made that better, except
Yeah,
magically doing the thing that we demanded later
right.
that you do.
Right. This is it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And for me, working in a system where I have no control and
Yeah.
I'm getting feedback on
Yeah.
things that I have no control over
Yeah.
is that is a place that is where I don't want to be there.
Yeah.
I deserve better, and I need to leave.
Yeah.
It just does not work for me.
Yeah. 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 And I hear those parts of it so much. We work in challenging, broken healthcare systems. I mean, I think there's just no bones about it. And knowing for ourselves what we bring, what we are interested and engaged with, how we will take care of ourselves working in those systems, is so important if we choose to do that, right? And when we can clarify what our values are, what our special skills are, what we get lit up about, right? That opens up opportunities. But in the pit of burnout, right? That's really hard to engage with.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I would love to pivot because I know that people listening to this, one of the challenges that they are carrying around is the fear of legal action. And so I'd love to pick your brain if that's okay and talk a little bit about what you've seen because all we hear and all I've heard, pretty much my whole career is that if you practice long enough, you will be sued. And that hangs over the head, I think, of so many of the physicians that I talk to. And it keeps people working in ways that are not efficient, not sustainable, that don't feel good. And so that for me shows up as people who are making overly detailed and complex notes, people who are not going to set boundaries and say no to patients when they've run out of time, and really sort of trying to make up for a broken healthcare system. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your perspective on some of the fears that we carry around being sued.
So, I totally hear this fear. If you practice long enough, you'll be sued. I remember people talking about that in medical school. I think our takeaway as physicians from that statement is the wrong takeaway. What I used to hear when I heard that statement was, therefore, I have to do something magical to make it so that I'm not that person who's going to be sued.
Right. I'm not suable.
Right. Right.
I'm going to be perfect, so I'm not
going to be
suable.
perfect, so that doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
Like that's not what that statement, let's talk about what that means. What it really means, and what I think we should take away from it, is that if you're sued, it doesn't mean you're a bad doctor. We make mistakes. We're human. And we've already talked about, some of the very silly frustrations with billing.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, the healthcare system is very broken. And there are systemic reasons why care is fragmented, care doesn't work. Things that have nothing to do with us as people. But we can make mistakes too. We're human. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, a bad doctor. And so I think that somehow we need to just look at that differently. That just because you're sued does not mean you're a bad doctor. And there's a couple of things I would say to make your listeners feel better about that.
Yeah.
Number one is that a lot of it's very hard to win a medical malpractice suit. Most of them are found towards the doctor. It's very, very hard to win. So that's good. That's good news.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't really matter. Like, unless you're like Dr. Death going and there's like a pattern of, people that, I don't know if you listened to that podcast, but
I
like
did.
a pattern of people who are, dying behind you, then that's bad. But if you made a mistake once because, gosh, I could see how this happened. This is sort of the pattern that you see in primary care, where somebody went into an ER for a cough. They did an X-ray. The preliminary read was no pneumonia. The final read is, there's like a little something.
Thing.
It should be followed up. You don't read that report because you have 1,500 patients,
or it's not sent to you.
But even if it was sent to you, maybe you missed it. We're human. We're human beings. And you just read the impression and you didn't see that it was in the bulk of the report, and then, God forbid, that patient ended up having cancer and years passed. They didn't follow up, and that could happen. You feel terrible, but you should feel terrible because of what happened to the patient, not because you're going to be sued. And if you're sued, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're bad. It really doesn't. This is just part of doing the business of life and death.
Yeah. Well, And we can get sued over not mistakes as well, right? We can have done everything correctly and people are upset and they have their own thoughts and feelings about what did or didn't happen.
Yes.
I sort of hear and see all, sort of all of these different elements. And I think the people who are most worried about being sued are generally so far away from it.
Yeah, I will just say, in terms of medical malpractice, because we're talking about this,
Yeah.
they the 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 bar for medical malpractice is what more likely than not somebody would do in a similar or same circumstance. That is what we would call standard of care. So it's actually, we're not talking about A plus care. We're talking about like more like C care. So that should give you some.
Yeah.
It's not. We're not talking about like M&M rounds. You don't have to be doing everything the perfect way that you would always do it,
Yeah.
but you do need to say like what most people would do in the same or similar circumstance as you.
Yeah.
But again, just because you're sued, just because you lose a suit, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're a bad doctor. It means that human beings make mistakes.
Right, right. And thankfully, I do see many more resources available to people if they are undergoing, legal action in terms of support in navigating medical malpractice, when a suit has been brought forward. Do you have any insights for anybody who is worried about that? I know some coaches, who sort of specialize
Yeah,
in that.
I would say like Stasia Dearman has a really good program. I think it's called Thrive MD or something like that. That's excellent. There are great resources. So don't despair. It's hard because, it's so slow. Like right now, I'm an expert for the defense on a case that I know that he didn't do anything wrong. And actually, there was a different diagnosis that caused these symptoms. I can't go into the details, but these things go on for years.
It's just a drawn out experience for that
Correct.
person who's
Correct. And
involved with
it's
it.
like
Yeah.
on your shoulders.
Yeah.
I will say that also for your listeners, because we haven't talked about this, but I sometimes, because I reach out to people and say, hey, would you be, are you interested in being an expert for this case? And I do reach out for plaintiff attorneys that are suing physicians. And sometimes I get pushback that are like, oh my gosh, why would you ever review a case for the plaintiff? And I will just say that it's really good to have credible, unbiased experts that are reviewing cases before they are in suit, because a lot of times what you're telling the attorney is that there was no yes, something bad happened. I'm sorry, there was a perforation in the colon, but the colonoscopy was performed appropriately. The complication was diagnosed immediately. It was treated appropriately, and there's no case. So if you're not involved in reviewing these cases, then you don't have the opportunity to stop the ones that are not appropriate.
Yeah. Oh, I love hearing that because I think that's a perspective that people wouldn't think about. Again, I think it's fear-based, right? Of if somebody's accused, then gosh, something bad must have happened, and I don't. But a lot of the times, suits are brought they don't have a case, right? Things were done appropriately. Bad outcome happened. No one's denying that, but someone can look and say, yeah, everything happened just as it should. And that's my expert medical opinion.
Yes.
Yes. And so we can support each other by being that unbiased, evaluator.
Yeah. And then if something, like, for example, if there was a case that the expert witness, there's a great newsletter, I forget what it is. I'll tell you the name of it after and you can link it. But it's this great newsletter that you can read actually expert witness cases and you can read the reports. But there was a report that I read about an a case where somebody was intubated and ended up dying very unexpectedly. They became bradycardic and then died. And it turned out that the anesthesiologist realized afterwards that she had given the wrong medication to the patient during the procedure. They were in the operating room sort of next to each other, and she had grabbed the wrong medication and given lidocaine instead, and the patient had died of lidocaine toxicity. She immediately disclosed this and was very, very frank about this mistake. She was sued for malpractice. She was very apologetic. She felt terrible about this having happened.
Yeah.
She ended up getting dropped from the case. And they only ended up suing the people that stocked the owners of the operating room because of the way that they stocked it. But there's something about not hiding things, about being straightforward, about it being the way that we should. We're advocating for patients, and mistakes can happen.
Yes.
If you're busy, things, and then that by finding those things out, it prevents it from happening again.
Yes.
Rather than hiding it.
Yeah.
Because then we can't learn from those mistakes.
Right. Right. And we do rely on the people and the systems around us, right, to help take care of patients, especially in, important situations like that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, because I know that you teach people how to do this work. So tell us a little bit about the course that you offer.
So I offer a couple of courses, but one of them is a flagship course where I teach you everything about how to be an expert witness, from like the courtroom, all the legal definitions, to the business, to how to market yourself. And it's called the Basics for Becoming a Medical Expert course, and anybody could sign up right away. It's online, and there's monthly live group calls. So you have like a hybrid situation where you have me live in your life, but also virtually through the videos. But it's a great way to get started, to make sure you're doing everything correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just disclose that I am a student in your course, and have just found it to be really, really interesting to get to learn more about, like, how do these processes work, and what can I bring to the table in terms of using my medical expertise in a very different role than the practicing care of patients. And so, this is something that I'm, hoping to do some of in my career, because I like doing lots of different interesting things. And so I think, just to shout out that that's a great opportunity for people, and we'll
Thank
put
you so
links
much.
to all of that in the show notes.
It's a great way to make some extra money.
Yeah.
It's very lucrative. It's
Yeah.
$500 is the starting hourly rate for physicians for
So
doing expert
$500
reviews.
per hour is the starting rate for people to do this work
As physicians.
as physicians.
Yeah.
For those of you who are listening who are thinking, yeah, I'd like to start my own practice. Yeah, I'd like to do something different. And I also want to be doing something, right, that helps to support my family. Yeah, I can see this as being a really great way to have some income, as well as, sort of building whatever else that you want, right? Because people are looking for some transition opportunities of, yeah, I'd like to do some clinical practice, but I'd also like to be doing something else with my time where I can use my expertise. This may be a great opportunity for people to engage with some of that work.
And it's also really interesting. And when you're talking about people being afraid of being sued, it's a particular, medical malpractice is just one type of case. There's a bunch of other cases that you can be involved in. So it's not all med mal. But if you're reviewing the medical malpractice cases, it does give you a bit more insight into your own clinical care. And then you start to realize where you can focus your energies. It's not on writing,
Yeah.
30-page notes. It may be just, as I mentioned, making sure that you read the entire report of
Yeah.
the radiology report.
Right.
That's a better use of your time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. So for people who are curious about you and this work, like where can people find out more about you and this program
So,
and your other programs?
yeah, so they can find out all about me on my website, which is highrockexperts with an S.com. And I'm also on all social media platforms, amyfogelmanmd.com. I also am having a webinar on September 30th at 7:30. It's more like niche down. It's about marketing your expert witness, but we'll be talking a little bit about the basics of expert witness, but that's more for people who have been doing the expert witness work and want to learn more about how they can get more cases. So, but if you have questions, you can definitely join. The last part will be Q&A. So
Great, great.
so you
And we'll
can
have
join.
links to all of that in the show
Yeah.
notes. Amy, thank you so much for sitting down with me and letting me pick your brain, not only about your story, but also some of these things, which I know, like I said, are a big concern for my audience. This has been great.
Thank you so much. It was a
Yeah.
pleasure.
All right, everyone. That's what we have for you today. Until next time, take care.